The press freedom was crushed. Courts were bullied. Opposition leaders were jailed. Lakhs were forcibly sterilized. All in the name of quote unquote saving the nation. And who did this? The very political forces that today cry hoarse about, who says quote unquote democracy in danger. Between 2016 and 2023, nationalistic pages saw 10x growth compared to liberal ones. And that's when the establishment declared war on quote unquote nationalism. Not because it was wrong, but because it was winning. Namaskar friends, I welcome you all to the digital media of Uday India. And today in Bharatiyata Ka Sankanat, I want to speak why nationalism became a bad word after 2014 and why there's no accident. Once upon a time loving your country was noble. It was Deshbhakti and it made your chest swell with pride. You could say Mera Bharat Mahan without being called names. You could salute the Tiranga, sing Bande Mataram or cry watching a soldier sacrifice on screen without anyone branding you as bigot. That was before 2014. But after 2014, something bizarre happened. And what is that? That is called nationalism. The instinct that binds a nation was demolished, not by our enemies, but by our own elite classes, media, political class. The same people who controlled the narrative for decades suddenly began mocking the national pride. And why? I am asking you why? Because nationalism got a spine, it got loud, it got unapologetic, and most importantly, it got rooted in Sanatana Sanskriti, something they could never digest. They were fine with weak India, not a proud one before 2014. India was expected to play meek. Our textbooks romanticized invaders. Our media ridiculed temples. And our politicians apologized for being too Hindu. And that was the India elite loved, ashamed of its past, confused about its identity and sacred of standing tall. But when the common Indian began chanting Bharat Mata Ki Jai without guilty, suddenly then the word nationalistic became more dangerous. Let's call out the hypocrisy. The terms like hyper-nationalist, toxic patriotism or chest thumping became media staples, but only for Indians. Never for China, never for Pakistan. Apparently, loving India is fascist, but glorifying Mao or Jinnah is academic freedom. Nationalism broke the monopoly over India's story. And the real panic began when nationalism challenged their biggest weapon, the narrative. For decades, a small clique decided what India should feel about itself. They wrote our textbooks, ran our TV channels, and created a version of India that was soft, submissive, and perpetually apologizing. But suddenly, young Indians started asking, why do we glorify the Mughals as benevolent kings? Can anyone reply that? Why does British era still get credit for railways while ignoring the looting of wealth? Why were Nalanda, Ayurveda and Vedic mathematics never taught with pride? That is what our Pujya Jagadguru Shankaracharya of Govardhan Pit, Swami Nishalaland Saraswati spoke on his 83rd birth anniversary in New Delhi, national capital. When NCERT began reviving these lies, the left liberals media lost its minds. What they call saffronization. They screamed, They literally screamed saffronization. But ask yourself, is correcting history saffronization? Or was the earlier discussion a subtle ideological colonization? The real problem? Hindu identity refused to stay silent. Here lies the crux. Here lies the crux, and our new generation X must understand this. If you will see, post 2014, nationalism became inseparable from the Hindu identity. Ram Temple, Bir Savarkar, Sanskrit, Sanatan Dharma, all of it returned to mainstream discourse, not as a religious crusade, but as a cultural reclamation. And that's what made the secular lobby panic. Because for decades, Hindus were conditioned to feel guilty for their gods, their customs, even their survival. But this time, Hindus were not asking for approval. They were asserting their own identity. Quoting Swami Vivekananda, voting with pride, wearing tilaks and chanting mantras, Vedas, Bhagavatas, Gitas in public life. And suddenly, the silent majority had a voice. And that voice said, I am Hindu, I am Indian, I am not ashamed. And predictably, that was twisted into majoritarianism. Follow the money. Why? Foreign funded groups hated nationalism after 2014 because thousands of NGOs lost their FCRA licenses. It is in public notice. One would be surprised to know that over 18,000 to be precise. And why? Because they were pushing anti-India narratives with foreign fundings. These were not charity organizations. These were not, never. They were influencing the operations. And when their funding dried up, they turned their wrath toward nationalism. Every Indian festival became pollution. Every military operation was questioned. Army was demolished. Culture was mugged. And anyone who dared defend India is there. And if is there, they will be labeled as Bhakts or nationalists. And as if they were doing something insult to the nation, let that sink in. I will say, let that thought process or those who are doing it, let them sink. Loving your nation, loving your motherland becomes law in your whole country. University campuses become hostile to Bharat from JNU to Jamia. What a strange transformation took place in campuses. National slogans were replaced with call for Bharat Teri Tukde Tukde Honge. Posters of Afzal Guru and Yaqub Menon were celebrated, and when students protested this anti-India circus, they were called fascists. Look. But those who cheered India's disintegration, what about them? They were held as heroes of freedom of speech. Look. What happened to our education system? It never taught Deshbhakti, patriotism. It taught guilty. It taught division, divide the society, community. And now it breeds contempt for very idea of Bharat or nationalism. Nationalism ruined vote bank politics, and that's why it was attacked. Let's be very blunt. If you look at pre-2014 politics was built on appeasement, caste, religion, privilege. But when nationalism entered the fray, voters began choosing national over narrow identities. So suddenly, issues like national security, economic pride, temples mattered more than handouts. That broke the old model. So what did the establishment do? Instead of adopting, they attacked nationalism. They painted it as hate. As if voting for Bharat was dangerous. Those who once murdered the constitution now cry, democracy in danger, I quote and unquote, democracy in danger, they shouted. Let's not forget, friends, the darkest chapter of Indian democracy, that was on 25th June 1975 when the emergency was imposed. That day the constitution was not violated, it was strangled. The press freedom was crushed. Courts were bullied. Opposition leaders were jailed. Lakhs were forcibly sterilized. All in the name of quote unquote saving the nation. And who did this? The very political forces that today cry hoarse about, who says quote unquote democracy in danger. Democracy in danger, quote unquote. What? Whenever nationalism rises, is not it ironic? The same people who once suspended civil liberties, shut down free speech and ruled like dictators, now you lecture the nation on constitutional values? What right have you got to do so or say so? And they declared emergency without shame, but call chanting Bharat Mata ki Jai a threat to democracy, and that too in India. But the truth is, they don't fear nationalism because it is undemocratic. They fear it because it awakens people, and awakened citizens don't follow for dynasty, deceit or division. Friends, digital Bharat dethroned media gatekeepers. The real revolution happened online, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. They gave the common Indian a voice. Soldier stories went viral. Dharma influencers emerged. Proud Sanatani creators exposed the decades of lies without filters. No editors, no sponsors, just truth. Between 2016 and 2023, nationalistic pages saw 10x growth compared to liberal ones. And that's when the establishment declared war on quote unquote nationalism. Not because it was wrong, but because it was winning. Hindu unity was final blow. Nationalism did what centuries of politics could not. It united the Hindus across caste, religion and language. You will see, from Tamil Nadu to Kashmir, people began connecting through Dharma and Bharat Mata. This unity could not be bought at any cost, could not be bribed and certainly could not be controlled. So it had to be branded dangerous, quote unquote, according to so-called secularists, Hippocratists. As if being proudly Hindu and proudly Indian was some kind of threat in our own nation. But here is the truth. They will never admit, remember it, they will never admit Hindu unity doesn't divide India, it builds India. Real nationalism scares them because it's free. Ultimately, nationalism is not about flags or festivals. It's about awakening our own country. It's about how you raise your children, vote with conscience, speak your truth and live with dignity in our own nation. What kind of nationalism breaks propaganda? It threatens intellectual monopolies. It destroys political dynasties. Because a nationalist doesn't follow orders. He asks questions. He doesn't beg for validation. He knows his worth. And that is why nationalism became a bad word after 2014. Not because it changed, but because it refused to kneel down. Friends, today is a great day. So I thought we must reawaken the Generation X and let the people of India, the Bharatiyas, the real Bharatiyas, which is there, which flows in their blood, they must proudly cheer and they must proudly say Bharat Mata ki Jai, Bande Mataram. That's all for today. Thank you.